So I'm what my friends call a greenie or an eco-warrior, or as said, I like to refer to myself as a waste tragic. When I was explaining to my 5-year-old son that I had landed my dream job after leaving university, he sort of tilted his head to the side and with just a touch of disdain in his voice said, "So you're a rubbish lady?" I don't think that's a very good job, but he was wrong. Because waste is my passion, and yes, I get excited about piles of rubbish. So what is waste? Well, Google defines waste as something to be eliminated or discarded once we're finished using it. I guess the real question here is, what is waste to you? So I grew up in South Africa, and it's a country with a turbulent past. And 50% of the population currently live in poverty, which is under 86 Australian dollars a month. There's no such thing as throwing out your couch to landfill because it no longer fits your aesthetic, or when your children were finished with their clothing that was passed on from family to family until it was nothing more than rags. Food waste is not really a concept I grew up with, where we recreated meals from leftovers, or we gave that food away to willing tummies. So I suppose in South Africa, waste would be considered something that has no usable value to anyone. Yet in Australia, we throw away 1 in every 5 bags of food we purchase, which is around 300 kilograms of food per annum. And it's not just the food, the very item like a punnet of strawberries or hamburger that we're throwing away, but it's all the resources that go into creating that product in the first place. So in the case of a hamburger, we're actually throwing away enough water to have a 90-minute shower with. We have become ambivalent to the resources and processes that go into creating the things that consumerism screams at us to buy on a daily basis. And it's from the moment we open our eyes and scroll through our social media feeds, we are bombarded with advertising that says buy, buy, buy. Now, consumerism itself, or consumption, is not a bad thing. We all need food, we all need water. But it's when we start to buy things that exceed our needs, and it's mostly to fill holes in ourselves or because we're trying to keep up with our peers in the social arena. We've just had COVID, and who of you in the audience suddenly developed a sour bread maker fascination? You were going to become the best in the block, or suddenly you had bought tons of indoor plants because you reckoned you had green thumbs. All mine died. So, who has gone into Kmart for just one thing and walked out with this trolley full of things that you don't know how it managed? You don't need anything, but you definitely want it all. Who has a cupboard full in your kitchen and has got all these gadgets and appliances that you never knew? I'll go first. I have a slow cooker, a rice cooker, a stick blender, a food processor. There's only me and 3 children that live in my home. There's no ways we use half these products. Who has seen the news advertising about people brawling over cheap TVs and outdoor patio sets, or have been caught in that centre aisle placing things in your trolley that you had no intention of buying when you walked in the first place? Now, this is not to shame anyone, because we've all done it. I remember around about 9.5 years ago when I fell pregnant with my daughter after a 9-year age gap due to infertility. And I remember going to every store I could and just buying pink everything went into my trolley. And yet she only ever wore a handful of those outfits. About 5.5 years ago, I was pushed onto a journey that I never intended on taking, and like all good sibling rivalry, I'll definitely point to my sister and say it was definitely her fault. We decided to open a skip-bin business, despite neither of us having any experience in the waste industry, a very male-dominated waste industry. I have a background in hospitality and finance, and my sister had a background in electrical work. But that did not deter us, and we dived headfirst into the wonderful world of waste. I love learning all about the various waste streams, and I did volunteering and I did community courses, but it wasn't enough for me. So at the age of 38, as a very newly single mother of 3, I decided to enroll in university for the first time. And I absolutely love studying. I did a science degree in sustainability, and I was able to fast-track my degree and finish 6 months early with a distinction. Studying gave me this opportunity to see how waste fitted into a bigger picture. And this is what sustainability is all about. It's managing the environmental, economic, and social systems, both locally and globally. And if we focus only on one, we do so at the detriment of the other two. So, in our time of owning our business, we rescued hundreds of items from landfill, and some of those you'll see behind me. So yes, that's a brand new Hugo Boss watch, and those are a pair of Dolce & Gabbana heels that sadly were not my size. But one of the things that I rescued that had the most profound effect on me is something that I know that everyone in this audience owns at least one pair of, and that would be the humble denim jean. Now, on the screen behind me, you'll see what Tatiana Schlossberg refers to as inconspicuous consumption. And it's the environmental impact that we have, that we don't know we're having when we purchase something or consume something. Now, the environmental impact of denim is huge, and I'm going to go through that today. So first we have cotton. Cotton is a really thirsty crop, and the WWF estimates that it's about 10,000 litres per 1 kilogram of cotton in developing nations. Cotton is also the crop that uses the most pesticides in developing nations, and cotton farmers earn very little, approximately $2,800 per tonne of gin cotton. Second is the dyeing. The cotton is spun into threads, it's dyed with a synthetic indigo dye, and then it's woven with white thread to create the iconic denim fabric. This is a very energy and water intensive process. And the dye used is derived from fossil fuels and is toxic, and most of the workers don't actually wear protective equipment. It's estimated it takes about 3,000 litres of water to distress, manufacture and dye one pair of jeans. That water is discharged into the waterways, and it's why there's a local joke that says you can see the colour of the new it season by the river. The water has, in these dyeing and finishing factories, has been tested to contain cadmium, chromium, lead and copper. The workers also only get paid about 206 Australian dollars a month for 15-hour days. And if we start to apply that sustainability framework I spoke about earlier, the local economic benefits are not matched by environmental and social outcomes. Now it comes time to packaging your product and shipping it off. This pair of jeans still had the tag attached. It was bought from Macy's, New York City. So it's a 10,000 kilometre trip from China to the west coast of the United States by ship, another 4,000 kilometres by truck overland to New York City. Macy's in New York City is one of the largest department stores in the world at 102,000 square metres. Consider the consumption of energy and water that goes into a store that size. Then someone bought those jeans, hopped on a plane back to Perth, Australia, creating about 2.6 tonnes of carbon emissions, put that in his cupboard, and then at some point decided he was never going to wear them and threw them away. When that pair of jeans was thrown away, that's arguably the least amount of environmental impact that pair of jeans had in its life cycle. And so this kind of analysis can actually be applied to everything that we consume. So where do we go from here? Now, I'm not suggesting you will become eco-warriors, quit your jobs, go to uni, career change. But what I am saying is that the world is in crisis right now. And we need to be conscious of what we consume. It's far more than the earth can reasonably sustain. We all have the power to make choices that can have a positive change. Now, I'm not suggesting you become a zero waste warrior. You often see people handing out mason jars saying, this is all my waste for a year. It's not sustainable. I couldn't do it. I'm not saying zero waste is not a visionary premise, and it is. And yes, we definitely need to minimize the waste and packaging and stuff that we send to landfill. But that's not where our waste begins. Our waste begins at the moment we choose to consume something. We need to start taking personal responsibility. We need to stop buying things. Don't get caught up in this green consumerism where we start swapping our unsustainable items for sustainable ones. Because at the end of the day, the most sustainable item we can choose to buy is one we don't. We need to take personal responsibility. We need to buy less. We can point to governments and manufacturers and producers of products and say they need to do more. And yes, they do. But more importantly, we need to buy less. The fast fashion industry has convinced us that there's up to 100 micro seasons a year, but there only used to be 2. In 2014, we bought 60% more clothing and textiles than we did in 2000, and yet we only kept them for half as long. After the US, Australia is the biggest consumer of textiles in the developed world. We consume and buy 27 kilos a year, and we dispose of 23 kilos a year. And if we apply what I said earlier, about 10,000 litres equaling 1 kilogram of cotton, we are all in effect throwing away the equivalent water to sustain one person for 315 years. Charities in 2018 spent $13 million throwing away unusable items. And this is due to us wish cycling. And wish cycling is when we start putting unrecyclable and unusable items in the donation bins because we don't want to deal with the responsibility of disposing of our consumerism. So, stop accepting the free giveaways. Start saying no. Every year, the grocery stores do these crazy things that people get so caught up in. And yet, in my experience, months after the promotion ends, all that ends up in landfill. Today, your TEDx bags are intentionally virtual to cut down on the stuff that we send to landfill. We need to start refusing. So, refuse your plastic straws and your plastic bags, the promotional balloons, the catalogues, the flyers, the coffee cups. A large Perth university consumes over 700,000 disposable coffee cups a year on campus. And this is something that I am directly involved in minimising. And it's not only physical items. Consider your consumption of spam mail and mailing lists. Spam email is responsible for 28.5 kilograms of carbon emissions a year due to the power required to run those servers. Recycling will never be the solution to our waste problem or a sustainable way to deal with what we consume. The message that I'm hoping that everyone takes away today is that every consumption decision that you make has far-reaching ripple effects. And those effects may not even be seen in your lifetime. And that everything you buy or let into your house, the stark reality is it's attached to inconspicuous consumption. Now, I think Anne-Marie Bonneau says it perfectly. She says, we do not need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly. Thank you.